Well, good morning. Let me introduce myself. I'm Tim Stone, Lieutenant Commander, U.S. Coast Guard retired. And today we are privileged to have with us two Coast Guard World War II veterans, Mr. Ted Herman and Mr. Harold Hanusa. Harold was stationed here at Port Angeles Air Station from 1943 to 1946, and he's going to share a number of events about what went on during the war years. Last month, he celebrated his 98th birthday. Ted was a sailor, a skivvy waver, that's a signalman, third for any of you non-sailors. He was stationed aboard the Coast Guard Manned Attack Transport, USS Bayfield, APA-33, and saw action in the Pacific Theater, and he recently celebrated his 97th birthday. 35 years ago, after I had arrived here in Cutter Confidence, I had the good fortune of meeting these two gentlemen in church, and we found a common bond. We were all Coasties. Harold is chairman of the board of a gang of Romeos. That's an acronym for Retired Old Men Eating Out. On Tuesday mornings, joining us today are fellow Romeos, Captain Mark Ashley, Chief Warrant Officer Mark Atwell, and Mr. Bob Edmonds. Mark, and I were shipmates in Cutter Confidence from 83 to 86. And Harold wowed us with his stories and showed us his photo albums, and it's quite apparent that these needed to be shared. And Mark scanned and tweaked the photos, and he and Bob put this slideshow together. And Harold, we got the evidence, but the XO said you won't be prosecuted for taking unauthorized photos with an unauthorized camera on a military installation during wartime. The statute of limitations has run out. After Harold's presentation, please feel free to ask any question, as this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. A little bit of aviation history. Not too long ago, we celebrated the 100th anniversary of Coast Guard Aviation. If there's is there anyone here who has not heard of Lieutenant Elmer F. Stone? Naval Aviator number 38 and Coast Guard Aviator number 1. We all know that he was the pilot of the Navy flying boat NC-4 that made the first Atlantic crossing in 1919. But here are a few things you may not have known about Uncle Elmer. He started out as a snipe, that's an engineer, in Revenue Cutter Onondaga. He made 9 convoy escort crossings in cruiser USS Huntington in World War I. The Coast Guard had no aircraft of its own and had to borrow what we could from the Navy. So for 9 years, the Navy shanghaied Lieutenant Stone for a number of special assignments. One, the NC-4 flight, but he's also the chief test pilot for seaplanes for the Navy, and he also did test pilot work for the Army. He perfected the aircraft catapult that were ultimately installed in cruisers and battleships, and he was instrumental in the development of aircraft arresting gear on carriers Saratoga and Lexington. Finally, back in the Coast Guard, he commanded 2 Coast Guard destroyers, Monaghan and Cummins. In addition to the 2 ships, he commanded Naval Air Station Rockaway, New York, Coast Guard Air Station Cape May, New Jersey, and Coast Guard Air Detachment San Diego. He died on active duty in 1936 of a heart attack. He was the most versatile and capable individual. As an aside, it was not unusual to see aviators at sea. On my first 4 ships, either the CO or the XO was an aviator. One more, did you know? Douglas Monroe and his buddy Ray Evans went to boot camp right here in Port Angeles, Coast Guard Cutter Ingham. She was a receiving ship, and they subsequently crossed deck to another 327 Coast Guard Cutter Spencer and headed for duty in the North Atlantic. Now we got to get something straight here. There are different kinds of stories, so please note the differences. The first is an aviation story, and it always starts out, this is a true story. Second is the fairy tale, and it always starts out, once upon a time. And the third is a sea story, and it always starts out, this ain't no shit. Harold's presentation takes us back to the early 1940s. So I'd like to provide a little background on what was going on at that time. Pearl Harbor was attacked 7 December 1941. 4 days later, Germany declared war on the United States. On the East Coast, the German submarine offensive Operation Drumbeat commenced on 11 January 1942. And within the next 6 months, 397 ships were sunk, with the loss of over 5,000 lives off the eastern Gulf Coast of the United States. Out here on the West Coast, the Japanese had their own offensive. Before Pearl Harbor, an op order dated 5 November 1941 directed a detachment of 9 submarines, 7 of which carried small patrol planes, to conduct surveillance and to be prepared to conduct surprise attacks on shipping off the west coast of the United States. Right after Pearl Harbor, in a 2-week period, 2 tankers were sunk, and 1 was shelled off the California, and 1 tanker was shelled off the Columbia River. Between February and October of 1942, 13 rounds were fired at oil installations in Santa Barbara, California. The steamer Coast Tracker was sunk just south of the Straits of Juan de Fuca. Rounds were fired at Fort Stevens, Oregon. An aircraft launched from submarine I-25 off Cape Blanco, Oregon, carried out an incendiary bomb attack on the Siskiyou National Forest in an attempt to ignite a firestorm. The steamer Camden was sunk off of Coos Bay. The tanker Larry Doheny was sunk off of Cape Sebastian. So, in June of 1942, our units were in a heightened state of readiness. Or were they? Let's go back to 1942 and see. Does anyone recognize this man? The end. Take 2. Take 2.
That's it?
That's it.
Well done. Okay,